Wonderful, thank you. So welcome to the session. Quick about me, so I've worked at Alation for about 18 months now. Prior to that, I worked for about 15 years working in data management, data governance across various financial services such as Bank of America, Barclays, Lloyds Banking Group. The session today, we're going to obviously naturally talk about the data catalogue, but we're going to talk about it more kind of strategically, how to use a data catalogue to drive an enterprise data culture, but also to use that catalogue and the culture to drive value to your organisation and to calculate that value. So, data catalogue for data culture. So when we look at this from a feedback from multiple CDOs across the globe, the feedback is always that data-driven culture is high on that priority list. Some of the reasons why: very offensive money making to the organisation, increasing the amount of revenue, increasing the likelihood of double-digit growth, so obviously very focused on that enterprise growth, marketing, more budget, more money flowing into the organisation. On the flip side of that, the classic defensive governance is never going to go away. Indeed, it's continuously going to grow. So those things such as GDPR fines, financial reporting fines under SOX and things such as that, and then ultimately the less quantifiable things such as incorrect decision making, which leads to poor models being built, poor models being implemented, less value being able to be optimized from the data that you have in the organization. So that naturally has led to governance being an ever-increasing focus. So if we look at the Google trends for over the past kind of 20 years, obviously we can see that data governance has been continuously searched and the interest continuously grows. Some of the reasons for that: we're at big data, so we're obviously naturally going to speak around the ever-increasing volumes of data, going up to 175 zettabytes by 2025, which to me is frankly scary. I can't even imagine how much 175 zettabytes is. The more unfortunate side effect of that is an ever-increasing amount of data leads to an ever-increasing amount of data being breached. Going back to 2009-19, ultimately, effectively one personal record for every living person on the planet being breached. So again, something not very positive to do with data. And then that naturally has led to people being really concerned at a much wider level across the organisation. So data governance is no longer just a niche thing from a small part of a data team. It's being seen by audit executives, risk executives and things such as that as well. Why do a lot of data governance strategies fail? So most organisations acknowledge that they need good data governance, good data quality initiatives and things such as that to be able to achieve those much more long-term business objectives. So whether that's risk mitigation, whether it's optimization of resources and trying to increase revenue. The reality, however, half of the people in the survey admit that they don't assess, monitor or measure. So how can you say whether you're on track to make the most from the data and govern data effectively if you aren't tracking progress? Less than a third expect to hit their ROI on their data exploration analytical tool sets. And then the reality that 60 to 85% of organisations will fail on their big data strategies. So again, that's the disappointment. Why do we see things differently? What we see very often is we see lots of data governance challenges. Naturally, there's the negative connotations, the sense that it sounds very restrictive, potentially taking away access from people. The reality that we see is that there are a lot of kind of implementation methods of how to govern data, and when you look at curation activity, whether that's data dictionaries or business glossaries, which are very restrictive, and the restrictions are things such as making certain fields mandatory. If a field's mandatory and I don't know the answer, my personal opinion is that I give up and do it elsewhere. That's the reality that a lot of organisations go through. And then similarly, lots of painstaking workflows means that you don't get the enterprise knowledge into one tool set. So our approach is trying to prevent the concept of shadow governance. So to us, shadow governance is those people who go into an enterprise tool set for all governance once, can't do what they want to do, so then start to do things in a spreadsheet or a SharePoint page outside of that tool. And then that goes back to the historical problems of siloed knowledge, not being able to find that information in a central repository and so on. We want to switch that on its head by making people empowered to make decisions, crowdsource information, and ultimately the reality that everybody in the organisation can be an SME on something, and that can be one specific data asset, one specific KPI or metric. So let's make the most of that. When we look at an enterprise data vision to us, we've seen on the earlier slides that everybody wants to have this enterprise data culture. So how do we see that data culture being really driven across the entire enterprise? 3 pillars, ultimately. Data access. So if people can't find and understand data, you aren't going to drive that data culture, that's the reality. If people can find and understand data, but they aren't data literate, so they don't know how to either utilize BI dashboards or indeed write their own queries to make their own decisions, you aren't going to have that enterprise data literate organization. And then finally, we're here to talk about data governance, so we will. We need people to take that responsibility, authority, whether that's around policies, processes, procedures, and indeed, importantly, people. And we see these as all complementing each other. So if you govern your data well, you're going to have data quality rules implemented, you're going to have lineage, you're going to have well-curated information. That naturally is going to have a knock-on effect to helping people find, understand, trust data. If you share information in a catalogue around how to query data, common queries, common joins that get executed, you're going to increase the organisation's data literacy as well. So for us, a well-defined strategy will focus on people. So rather than focusing on kind of that dictatorship of these are the policies and regulations that we need to adhere to, let's document to prove that we meet those regulations, focus on empowering those users across the organisation who want to get connected to data or BI in some way, shape or form. Really focus on that, push that message of trying to get people in to do those things as much as possible. We want to increase the trust of the data that you maintain. So I know that there's a lot of data practitioners in the room focusing on data warehousing, data lakes and so on. You've got a never-ending amount of data. You want to help people focus on the data that they want to use and know whether they can trust it or not. And that leads to the quality and accuracy. But then a huge piece for us again, going to the point earlier on I made around kind of endless approval workflows, we want to focus on getting as many people in the organisation participating. So if you're an SME and you know something on a KPI, allow you to contribute. Don't have to go to a specific data steward to be able to contribute that knowledge into the organisation. And then the idea for us is that we don't want to hide from those defensive regulatory compliance asks, but they should be a side effect of doing that thing to help people get connected with data. When we look at our data governance methodology and how we implement that, we end with monitor and measure, and the whole idea of that is that we want to help people track progress. One of their data governance initiatives, so how many business terms do we have, how many data assets, whether that's schemas, tables, columns, data sources do we have, but also taking it a step further, how many BI reports, how many data stewards, how much curation do we have, how many classifications, so do you have PII flags, critical data element indicators, all of those things. We want to help you measure that so you can track your progress of the governance initiative, but to take it to the next level, we want to help you ultimately communicate the value of what you are doing in a data catalogue as well, which leads us on to the data catalogue value. So we have the concept of Alation's Data Catalogue Value Index, or DCVI. So what is it? It's just an interactive tool which takes information which happens in Alation, the product. So Alation being a catalogue, people search, people click, people execute queries, people look at schemas, tables, columns, BI reports, look at business terms. We take all of that information and make it available in ultimately a database called Alation Analytics. We use that information to calculate the value that the catalogue is adding to your organisation. So as an example, every time somebody searches and finds information that they're looking for, that typically saves that person an amount of time. If you're saving an amount of time, that equates to some type of dollar value. So when we use DCVI, we want to iterate based on every 3, 6, 9, 12 months. Let's reassess and see if the value of the catalogue is going up. So we like to see that we get more users into the product, more people searching, more people finding data that they care about. Naturally, the hope is that more curation leads to more people finding that information. And ultimately, we want customers to succeed with the product. So a big part, and I know that we've got some of our customers in the room, especially on the front row, they use Alation. It's a tough ask to kind of justify the cost of a catalogue, especially when it's kind of still seen as a niche product that isn't still seen as an enterprise must or a necessity. So having a mechanism to help people justify the cost of the catalogue and prove that the usage and value is coming from it is incredibly important. So when we look at the value of the catalogue, naturally we talk about the baseline value. So this is the Alation usage-specific value of how well governed is the data, how well curated, can people find, what people search for. So this is very automated. There are a few assumptions, such as what's the average salary of an employee in the organisation, how much time would people save every time they search and discover data in Alation versus the traditional route of having to phone up an SME or Slack or Teams and so on. So that's the kind of the out-of-the-box automated method. We can then also go into specific use cases, so looking at where people are maybe fulfilling specific data-related projects 5% faster. Customers such as Salesforce say that they save 5 to 10% of their budget of every single data-related project going forward. So obviously in every year that's an incredible amount of money to be saved. And then in addition to that, looking at the overall value, so the customer strategic value, trying to align to the business objectives of the company. What are the actual business objectives? Are we actually helping people get to that company objectives, whether that is risk mitigation or ultimately trying to expand that organisation and their growth as well? We ultimately look at the main drivers, so the main reasons why people have a catalogue. So the top one, self-service and or analyst productivity. So again, really focusing on helping people get connected with data to find and understand, get connected. If they find a piece of data, allowing them to query it within the tool. If they find a BI report, allowing them to seamlessly link into that BI tool of choice. Digital or cloud transformation is obviously a huge use case. So helping people prioritize where to move data from their kind of on-premise systems to the cloud solutions. And then naturally, data governance. If we're connecting, we're cataloging, we're helping people find data. You want to prompt them to find the right data for the specific use. You want to make people aware of any regulatory needs, any policies, any standards, and ultimately anything they need to be aware of, whether that's a data quality problem, a limitation in the sample size of data, and so on. So when we talk through the value estimation process, we want to talk through those key objectives and the expected outcomes. So ultimately, how do we see value as an organisation and how do we help you calculate that? We then look at some key assumptions, such as that the average salary and things such as that. We're then going to run the value index and make that calculation. And then we'll also look at that kind of those lower level use cases and the value that can be determined from there. So when we look at those kind of assumptions that we typically look at, so the average hourly rate for somebody who comes into the catalogue, the intrinsic value. So to us, every piece of data that you catalogue has a value even before somebody uses it, because if you aren't doing anything with that piece of data, why are you storing it? Obviously the classic analogy around data is the new oil. The scenario is that oil has value even before it gets used. The difference, I'd argue, would be that data continues to add value. The same piece of data can be used over and over again, whereas oil devalues. So I personally aren't a huge fan of that analogy, but the whole idea that by having data catalogued, it has an amount of value, and that typically may be 1p, one euro cent per piece of data asset, but when you scale that up to hundreds of thousands, millions of tables and columns, obviously that's where the value just of storing that data is incredibly large. Consumption value, so every time somebody uses that data, it has a value. Average time saved, so every time somebody searches in Alation, discovers some data and then can get connected to it. The traditional route of having to speak to somebody or maybe ask the SME who's answered the same question 5, 10, 20 times in the past year to different people. They're probably getting fed up. So saving them and their SME fatigue, trying to pass that is one great thing, but also the fact that you are saving each of those users time to discover that data as well. And then the average time on comprehension, so again looking at those things such as any classifications such as security, PII, critical data element indicators, all of those types of things. That's one level to it. Natural language titles, natural language definitions, who are the top users of that piece of data, who are the stewards, so everything you can think of around that data to help people really understand it. And then moving into things such as lineage, data quality alerts, so letting people know if there are specific problems associated. And then importantly, something in Alation which isn't in a lot of catalogues is the concept of being able to create queries that can be executed by non-technical users. So if I write a SQL statement, I can curate it, explain what it does, maybe parameterize it, share it with business users who can type in the parameters whenever they want to run that kind of ad hoc query. Each time that query gets run, it saves the BI team some time as an example as well, and again that implies value. And then we look at the variety of things, those business value objectives, some of the classics that we have, data analysts, data scientists onboarding, trying to get them productive faster. And again, obviously we know that there's a lot of people leaving organisations, new employees starting, and an ever increasing rate ultimately. So if you can get analysts connected to data in 2 days versus 2 weeks, you're saving a huge amount of time. And then again, the classic ones that we see, data democratization. So ultimately everybody should be able to be connected with data in the company, but also lost tribal knowledge. If an SME leaves, that knowledge is typically lost or in the abyss of their email mailbox. If it's in the catalogue, it's tagged to the piece of data that they're talking about. That knowledge is stored in the catalogue forever ultimately. So when we look at the value index, we've got two methods. So before purchasing, implementing the catalogue, we have a simulator. So this works off a few more assumptions, so things such as how much data do you think you're going to be cataloguing, how many users do you think you'll have, how much time do you think you'll save, all of those types of things. So it's very kind of theoretical. Obviously a lot of catalogues do similar. The huge differentiator for us is that when we go live and you implement Alation, we have all of those usage metrics available to us and we want to utilise that as well. And as I kind of mentioned earlier on, part of that is to ultimately show the progress of your data governance initiative. So after 6 months we increased our curation by 10% as an example, but what is the knock-on effect of that? We're ultimately connecting more people with data and getting them finding more information faster, which is where once you're a customer, when we go live, we'll run the DCVI report based on your actual usage of the catalogue. So we'll now go into have a look live. So this is obviously just some sample data to bring it to life ultimately. So what we can see straight away is you get some high-level value metrics. We get to see the overall value. So you can see here as an example, $1.8 million being saved in catalogue value just from comprehension. So people having definitions, classifications in the catalogue being viewed is saving value. Every time somebody searches, it's saving them time, it's saving them effort, it's saving money. Let's justify that. And then going down into things such as those analyst productivity use cases, things such as curation in the catalogue is adding value. Having that social coverage, so finding those top users and stewards in the catalogue connects you with the experts faster as well. All of those types of things. And then governance, so if you have any specific rules on conformance, such as specific data assets, such as critical data elements must have a minimum level of curation, must have a data owner, must have a data steward, they're kind of the must-haves, being able to calculate those in here as well. And then looking at that overall breakdown. And the key thing, as you can see, is that we have these overall trends, so we can see over time, is the value going up? We hope so. If not, we obviously work with you and with our success managers to look at why is adoption dwindling? Are there specific use cases which are slowing people down? All of those types of metrics, which really feeds into the kind of the wider discussion, because we know that we want to work with our customers to be successful, and Alation as a catalogue product, we aren't the only thing that makes governance a success. the people, the processes, the methodologies that you implement are an incredibly crucial part to that. And also what you actually want to do with Alation. Do you want to connect to just analytical warehouses, or do you want to connect to operational and an analytical environment? All of those factors lead into how much value you can get out. So we want to have those discussions with our customers. And then also we want to look at the value comparison. So are we actually getting more value now than we did 3 or 6 months ago? Looking ultimately is, are you still getting the value that you need from the catalogue? Because if the value is going down, we need to work with you to do something about it. Asset breakdown, again, just looking at what people are actually doing in the catalogue. So are people running a lot of queries? Are people sharing a lot of queries? How much data do you have catalogued? How many people are coming into the catalogue to do something? All of these pieces of information feed into what people are actually getting out of the catalogue. Searches is a really interesting one for me from kind of the prioritization perspective as well. So we capture every time somebody searches what they typed to do that search, but we also capture what did they click or indeed not click. And a really valuable piece of information for me is if people search the catalogue but don't click anything, that implies that the knowledge they are looking for isn't in the catalogue today. So as a data governance person, I want to look at that information, determine, is it a business term or indeed is it a technical asset that hasn't yet been catalogued? Because if it's a technical data asset that we have that isn't catalogued, we want to connect that data source and catalogue it. If it's a business term, we want to get a definition in the catalogue to help people find that information. So looking for those gaps, that the data that isn't even there yet, feeding into that prioritization process as well. And then various other things, obviously looking down to tables, queries, trust flags. If people want to endorse, warn or deprecate data, so if I'm the data analyst, I've written a query and executed it, and I found a flaw that maybe an automated DQ routine hasn't found, I want to let other people know that there are limitations in that data set before I query it. So all of those types of things, and naturally we can drill down and look at any of those in isolation. And then the final piece, looking at, again, what do people actually do with data? So you've catalogued it, you've governed it, you've hopefully enabled people to find that data quicker and easier. All of that information is great, but naturally we're here at a big data conference, everybody's moving to the cloud, there's endless on-premise solutions from 10, 20, 30 years ago. That data in a big data center still has a cost associated. You've got on-premise database analysts, all of those types of things. We want to help you connect to all of those data sources and look at how much computation time gets executed on each of those data sources day in, day out. And again, look for those patterns to help you prioritize what data is being migrated. Are people still querying on an on-premise solution which you're looking to decommission? And again, just looking for those patterns in what people are doing ultimately. So things such as, in this case, naturally we can see that Snowflake usage continues to grow, which is great from that cloud warehouse solution. We can see that the Teradata solution is kind of a deteriorating usage, which again meets the expectation. But what we can see here is that we've got a specific day where there's a peak in queries executing on Teradata. From here we can then have that discussion to go back to the person who executed that query, ask them what happened on that specific day, and it may be that the pipeline to Snowflake kind of failed, so there's a problem limited around that, and that's why they had to move to the legacy version, or indeed whatever happened, and ultimately using, again, going back to that person, speaking with them, working with them to understand what's happened, why did it happen, can we prevent that, and ultimately with the aim of decommissioning some of those kind of legacy systems as well. And again, looking at those query executions, where a query is being ran, which data source are they being run against, which queries are being run the most, all of those types of things, really trying to get as much rich information around that workload ultimately and where the cost is being allocated. I am pleased to say that we've got some customers on the front row who have used this. They've given me permission to share the value that they've had. I can see some smiles, so based on their actual usage from just the baseline catalogue value, they're seeing around $5 million a year in savings. So again, these value statements aren't just theoretical, they are based on what people do in the product day in, day out, the trends, the patterns, and ultimately the vision obviously is we want to get more people connected with data. The side effects are more people curate data, because they can see that they get connected to data faster. If they have a tool set that doesn't limit them and they can crowdsource, ask SMEs to participate, find data stewards quicker, easier, they're going to be more bought into the catalog experience. If you're a data analyst or data scientist who can execute queries in a tool set, as well as find that curated information, you're going to come into a catalog and tool set more often. So ultimately, we really want to get people to see the vision outside of cataloging technical metadata, adding business terms purely for those regulatory purposes, really turning a catalog into a business enabler for the entire organization. So that's the end of the session. Thank you for the time. If there are any follow-up questions, we are in a booth just straight right out of the exit and on the left-hand side. So thank you for the time.
Please leave all headsets on the chairs. Thank you very much.